Barbara.
I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Naima. We're three Black moms.
Killing, murder, robbery, suffering, catastrophes, pain, death. You can watch it all day long. Not on movies, but on the daily news. Now, some people think it's important to watch the news because you got to know what's going on. You got to keep yourself safe. You got to keep up with weather, traffic. You got to make sure that you know if there's any kind of thing that happened, like an accident, a plane crash. I mean, you never know. Somebody that you love might be in trouble and you may need to know. Hurricanes. What if somebody where you're living is in distress and maybe you're next? So you need to know, right? Well, how much of the news that you watch is something you could really do something about? But okay, let's say you really need to keep up with what's going on. You feel like you ought to know. But do your children need to know? How much can they help prevent the mugging down the street or the carjacking downtown or the fire that killed 5 people in the building across town? I mean, knowing about that would do what for them? Now, some people say it's a teaching tool. You can talk about it and talk to your children about what they would do in certain situations or how to keep themselves safe. But most people don't sit down and talk to their children during the news. They turn on the TV, they just let it flow right on in, and they don't debrief. And who knows if your child is traumatized by all the pain and suffering they're watching? Do we ask them? Should we even let our children watch the news at all? Well, sisters, let's talk about this. And maybe we should think about, should we even be watching the news?
Okay, I'll start. I'm a lifelong journalist. So for me, watching the news is imperative. And right now I'm teaching journalists. And so watching the news for them is imperative. Now, I remember a story and it stuck with me. And I understand, Naima, what you're talking about being traumatized. When I was a little girl, and I remember because the news was on all the time, there was a story about this little boy who had died because he had smothered in an old abandoned refrigerator. And I'm in my mind now, I was young, probably not even middle school age. And I
remember that story too.
Because I remember the hysteria of the mother calling his name, says, "Why won't you talk to me?" And in my mind, I can always remember that and the pain that she had. But what I also remember is the life lesson that came from that. And the laws that said that if you put a refrigerator out, you have to take the doors off.
Yeah.
Children do that. And the fact that our mother talked to us about, games like hide and seek and getting in boxes and getting in things like that where you could be harmed. So even though the child may not be able to do anything about uh, the carjacking, they will remember to lock the doors when they're in their car. Maybe they won't be able to do anything about that fire across town, but that is a teaching tool to say, okay, in case of a fire, how do we get out of this house? Are our smoke detectors working? Those are the kinds of things, the teachable moments that can come instead of taking a disaster. And we all know that if it bleeds, it leads. That's going to be part of the news. But what you can teach your children is that everything isn't preventable, but some things you can learn to be more careful. And that's just the local news. There's also politics. Kids need to understand how their country works or doesn't work. And truthfully, they're getting a lot more these days than we ever did because of the internet. And they're seeing these things and they're hearing these things on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter, on all of the other social media apps, and they're not given the context. So, an uninformed public is not good for anybody. We can see that with people who are still saying that the 2020 election was stolen. If you're not informed, you cannot make an informed opinion, and you lack context, and anyone can tell you anything. Yes, it's traumatizing for children. It's traumatizing for all of us, but we need to know what's going on.
Well, Barbara, what's your thoughts on that?
My journalism teacher said to us, believe none of what you read and only half of what you see. Now, this was when I was in college. He was pretty much a comedian. He was a really tough taskmaster, taught us a lot of things about how the news is often surreal and not real, and how depending on what news station you're listening to, it's going to be twisted one way or another. For that whole thing about being unbiased, throw that out the window. There's no such thing as that. And but he was talking to young adults. I am not one who is in favor of young children watching the news, and I will tell you why. Well, number one, my kids growing up were pretty bored by the news. They were waiting for their program to come on, Lassie or something. But I remember as a young child, I was a reader. And I would listen to our parents talk about things that were in the news, and then I would find out more information from reading the newspaper. Now, I was 9. I'm telling you, this happened to me when I was 9. When I was 9, and we were on vacation and staying in a motel that was run by a Black company, and we had nice rooms, and Daddy was talking about how safe it was. There was a story that came out about 3 young girls who were the same age as roughly that we were, who were all murdered in their motel room. And the story was pretty explicit in detail. I heard Mama and Daddy talking about it. I picked up a newspaper and read the story myself. It was pretty grisly. Some of the words I didn't understand what they meant, but I knew that it was all about the family not being safe in their motel room. Now, I will say this about letting young kids watch the news. I think that kids who are young, their innocence needs to be preserved as long as it can. Yes, there are teachable moments like a fire, and you have the little fire drill in your home. Okay, we're all going to meet by the flagpole at the school that's next door if there's ever a fire. If someone tries to steal you, I remember when my kids were young and some man tried to kidnap this little girl. She held on to her bike and would not let go, and he could not drag her and her bike into the van. Well, I told my kids we're going to practice this. We went out in the side yard, and this is the truth. I practiced with the kids trying to snatch them off their bike and sort of train them to hold on to the bike as tight as they could and not let anyone, particularly me who was practicing, snatch them off their bike. And this is because of a news story that I saw. I don't remember if they saw any of it or not, but I remember telling them about it and saying, this is going to save your life. You're on your bike, someone tries to steal you, hold on as tight as you can and you don't let go. And then there are other little instances like that where you use the things that you as an adult see on the news to tell your kids about and train them. And you can soften the blow. I am a firm believer of keeping their minds as pure as I can for as long as I can, because they're going to hear all the dirt sooner or later, either from their friends or from some other source. And I want to be the kind of parent that is there to hear their concerns. Well, I heard somebody said something like this happened, because in the big city, there is crime all around you and they are touched one way or another. I don't need to bring it into my house. I don't watch the news that much myself. And I think that it is important to guard your children's minds. They're easily impressionable. They will have bad dreams just seeing an ordinary scary story. I I am a firm believer in maintaining my kids' innocence from the news that has become far too graphic, far too explicit. Anytime they say, now beware, some of these images may be disturbing. Well, why would I want my kid to see something that's going to be disturbing to me? And I'm an adult. No, they don't need to know all the news. They will find out how horrible the world is a little bit at a time just by going to school. Now, they do need to know if it's a snow day, if the schools are closed, or if there's a child molester in the school you need to be aware of. They need to know those things, but you need to be able to say them from the voice of a parent and not have them hear all that graphic ugliness up front.
Mm.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I think we're talking about different things and in a way. I mean, if when my daughter was 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, of course I wasn't letting her watch the news. But what I'm saying is that you don't just turn on the news and then you go cooking and go to another room or something like that. And there's always going to be stuff that they don't need to hear. Frankly, a lot of news is, like you said, boring for the kids anyway. But there are certain things in the context that you need to tell them or to let them hear. Because what happens isn't just us watching the news or letting them watch the news, is that they come back, they come home from being out with their friends, and they hear these things and they're all out of context. And the thing is that like because we have the internet now, where we
Mhm.
didn't none of us had that going on when our kids were young. And so
That's
the
true.
whole thing about the 24-hour news cycle has changed so much from when we were young and when we were in college. So you have this continuous loop going on. Like when 9/11 happened, it was traumatizing for children who they kept running this on this loop and they thought it was happening again and again. So you have to be there for that context. And because of the internet, because we have a 24-hour news cycle, because everything is part of the World Wide Web, the little kid that got kidnapped in Europe, we're hearing about it within that 24-hour cycle. So, kids are being grown up thinking, oh, somebody's going to snatch me off the street. And the thing is whether we let them hear the news or not, they're going to hear it in some context, and we have to be able to provide the context. I'm saying the news is going to be out there. They're going to see it. Well, and they're going to hear about it. And it's just like if you try to keep your kids from learning about sex before you're ready, they're going to learn about it, and then they're going to learn about it all wrong. So I say if you have something on or something that you need to tell them or they need to know, you have to be the one to give them that context. And that's but if they're 5 and 6 years old, a lot of the stuff isn't going to affect them that we think about as the grisly news things. But by the time they're 5 years old, they also should know about good touching and bad touching. They should also know about bodily autonomy. They should also know that if somebody wants to give you a hug and you don't want to, you don't have to. If an adult comes to you and and tells you to keep a secret, that you immediately tell your parents because adults and children are not friends. I mean, it's things like that are in the news that you need to put some context to. And yes, we all want our kids to be innocent for as long as we can, but it's just not going to happen, and we need to deal with that. And then there are other parts of the news that we have to think about, like when they worry about climate change and the floods and the fires. And we have to be able to put it in the context of like, okay, we can't fix this, but let's see what we can do in our house. Let's buy the toilet paper that is made from bamboo. Let's get a bidet. Let's recycle. Let's turn off the water when we brush our teeth. Let's do the little things that we can do. Let's walk instead of riding everywhere. There are things that we can do when kids start worrying about those kinds of things. You know, what can we do to do our part in saving the planet? You know, and those kind of things, you can give them uh, a feeling of, I'm doing my part. And it's not just about the murders, the rapes, the fires, the floods. It's okay, there's a lot of things going on. There's fires because we're doing things to the planet that the planet, you know, really can't handle. What can we do? When Sarah was little, when we used to go to church, there was a one of her friends used to always, during the prayers, would always pray for the polar bears, because you know she knew about the polar ice
Melting
cap.
ice
And
caps, yeah.
you know, so kids, they hear these things, and we have to give them some context. We, you know, we can try to keep some things from them, but my thing is that when they hear it, and if you don't want to discuss it, that makes it scarier. You know, if kids don't hear, if they don't get some kind of explanation from you, they make things up in their mind. And
Oh, yes.
what they may be making up may be scarier than what it actually is.
Well, I'd like to throw a thought out there. And for those who are watching, feel free to write in your comments. We'll share them with our viewing audience. Should you let your children watch the news? What do you think? But I'd like to throw
Huh.
this thought out there. Are we protecting our own minds from unnecessary pain and suffering in the name of keeping up with what's going on? Now, there was a woman who was carjacked downtown, you know, a few days ago, and I was listening to the 3-hour radio show, and it's pretty horrifying. But within that 3-hour radio show, I heard the story about that carjacking 13 times.
Mm-hmm.
13 times. So when you talk about the World Trade Centers being crashed into,
The
and
re-traumatizing.
over and over and over, re-traumatizing. It was traumatizing every time I heard about that woman getting carjacked. Did I need to hear about it 13 times to remind me to be safe in my car? I don't think so. And when you look at the news, and let's be clear, everything in America is about business. It's about sales. You're selling advertising, and we need an audience to buy these products. That's how we make money. And like you say, what it say, if it bleeds, it leads. Now, there are many people around the world that are doing wonderful things. We don't hear about that because we have been trained to feed a diet of pain and suffering. And why have we allowed this to happen to us? There are things that could be shown to us that would be uplifting, that would be educational even. But instead,
PBS.
yeah. I mean, and those are the channels that I watch.
PBS has a news hour. There are things, and that's the thing, is we also have a choice in where we get our news. You could look at the newspaper. You can get information. Because
it doesn't have to be the worst crime and violence, because you already know that's there. But you can get information that's educational and helpful for children, and even teaches safety without constant repetitive stories about people suffering in ways that just makes them feel bad. And it makes you feel bad watching it. And that's what we're not realizing. We feel bad. It does something to you watching it, hearing it over and over and over and over again. And
well, you know, there are news shows that are specific for children that I've heard advertised, and those things are pretty cleaned up. They can tell the news without telling the horrible side of it or the gruesome picture, and news items that are worthy of knowing, where their purpose is to educate and not frighten. And I am reminded of the scripture that says, whatsoever is pure, whatsoever is lovely, whatsoever is of good report, think on these things, because it's all about not allowing your mind to be polluted with things that are going to cause fear. Fear is like one of the number one things that cause heart attacks. People are frightened of things that they don't know. People are frightened of things that have become exploded in their mind because, oh, this catastrophe is happening. Is this going to happen to me? These people, they lost everything they own. They lost their homes. I mean, you have no idea how many people called me or texted me about
Yeah.
Ian
Are you
because
okay?
the news
'Cause you're
showed
down in
all
Florida.
of Florida being blown up. And
Right.
that was only in a few cities. But people were concerned because I have friends who live in other states who knew that I lived in Florida, who were not exactly sure, well, was I hit? Did my home blow up? Did I lose everything? Was I flooded? And I live in an area where when the hurricanes come, because I'm inland, we're kind of skirted. But that doesn't, and they even have on Facebook, check in if you're safe so your friends know that you're safe, and people will do a little thing like that.
Yeah.
But we live in an age where we are privy to a lot of knowledge. And sometimes it is just knowledge overload. We
Yes.
can't do everything about everything. There are only a few things that we can affect, but you get saturated with things that become so burdensome that we become fearful, paralyzed, and don't do anything.
Right.
Yes, we
Or we
become
make bad
overwhelmed.
decisions based on fear. Now, all three of us went to school for journalism. And the thought was always that news is the thing that people want to know. But it
What they're
never was,
talking about. Yes.
it never was, the idea was never put forth that you could tell good news and make that be the thing that you want
Yeah.
everybody to know. It never was given as an option. And we didn't think to question how we were being programmed to think what news is. So now
Yeah.
I run our company's daily news website. And and we got, our company has a news crew that goes out and reports stuff. And I've expressed the same thought. I'm not going to allow myself to be bombarded with the worst of human behavior because it affects me and it doesn't help the society. I already know the things that I'm against. I don't need to hear about a carjacking 13 times a day in order for me to understand that I must be aware when I'm driving. And I don't need to hear all the details about someone's rape and murder over and over and over and over again. I don't need to see buildings blow up and people dropping to their death over and over and over again. That's voyeurism. That's enjoying pain and suffering. And why have we allowed ourselves to be conditioned to do that? So now, and I've had discussions with our news crew. We got one reporter. He loves to go out to riots and buildings burning and stuff, and he does a great job for photographing it. Okay, that's fine. Got another one that
People like that stuff.
the crime scene and
Train wrecks.
all that stuff. But I'm saying, look, I understand that's information, and all the other channels are running that. But I would like our website to focus on good deeds that people are doing, because that has its own effect. When you see it, you feel uplifted. And everything that's news doesn't have to be bad news. Why are we thinking it
There.
does?
Well,
And
that's the thing.
say you're
That's the
gonna see it
thing.
on your phone anyway. It's gonna pop up all the time. But do you sit there and
I
play it
shut those
over
things
and over again?
off.
So you can
Well,
always decide what you want to put in your brain and your mind and your heart. And then you think, if you know that it's a downer for you, it's depressing. 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old child, they gotta go to school thinking about, child that was kidnapped and murdered, or person that was shot, and all these horrible things. Yeah, they're gonna hear about it from their friends. But I think sometimes you can fortify your children by giving them some powerful good news to hold on to. So even when they hear the worst of the worst of the worst, they don't feel like this is all the world is, and I'm not safe, and I don't even want to leave my house because I might get kidnapped, snatched, beat up, robbed, stabbed. So we do that to ourselves and our children. And we need to rethink, why are we allowing ourselves to be constantly infused with the worst behavior? And it's manipulative. Because when you're in a state of fear, people can convince you to do anything. And sometimes it's not in your best interest, whether it's taking medications that really aren't good for you, but they're making somebody a lot of money, or if it's any kind of thing, people will condition you first with fear. So then you react and you don't think. And then later on down the line, think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But you'd already been conditioned by fear. And it's not accidental, it's very deliberate, because you look at who finances the news. Just look at the companies that finance the news. Look at the advertisers. So if we can realize that this is all business, it's not about trying to keep us informed. It's business, it's programming, it's brainwashing, and we can choose to empower ourselves and choose to watch the news that is empowering. And if we want to give our children a sense of the ability to change the world, we can have those conversations, but we don't have to subject them to the worst information, make them feel bad and make them feel helpless and make them feel like victims.
Well, here's a thing too, I would say, be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. If you train yourself to not be absorbed with all of the bad news, I watch the news every so often. Like I said, I had a friend say, "How are you doing with Ian?" And I was like, "Who's Ian?" So oblivious that I had a storm coming my way. But your friends will tell you. And I know at one of my old churches that I used to go to, they would go on what they would call a media fast, where you weren't supposed to listen to the news, radio, television, or anything for a week. People were having withdrawals, like, but there was always someone who was willing to tell you what was happening. So it wasn't like you missed, the world going by for
it's like
7
a soap
days.
opera. If you miss a couple of episodes, you pick it right back up. It's like you never left.
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing, though, is that like I said, I do watch the news, so I do know when the hurricane's coming, because I do need to know that. I can't.
You're in
I can't.
Boston. You're not going to get a hurricane.
We get
Yeah.
hurricanes all the time.
Yeah. So we get tornadoes here.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Well, yeah. See, and that's why I have to watch the news, because I can't afford to be oblivious. But as someone who is also training and teaching young journalists, we do talk about that, because my course is about diversity, and so we explore different communities. But at one point, I have to say to them, okay, now tell me, because now that we know that the world is racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist, xenophobic, and all these other terrible things that
you could just cut to the chase and say sinful.
Well, that's a different
that's a judgment.
That's a different.
No, it hits us all. Everything that you've named, those are not good things.
But what brings you joy? And that's something that we talk about when we're talking about reporting different stories. We also, because we're still in it, actually, it's Hispanic Heritage Month.
Yeah.
And we talk about different stories that affect the Hispanic and Latino community. Those terms are not interchangeable. But we also have to say, okay, what are the stories that we don't hear that would bring joy? There are things on Instagram like Upworthy that you can follow that always have these funny, joyful stories, people coming home, surprising their kids from the war, all kinds of fun stories, somebody getting a new puppy, and sometimes you do need to clean your mind with that. It's not really all doom and gloom. There are a lot of fun things, and a lot of times, if we press our local news and say, is there anything good out there? We want to hear something good too. They will go out and they will find those stories. Now, people make fun of that, but the thing is, you have to realize that sometimes people need to hear the joy, because if they know that there's joy, then and they can appreciate, and do what they can to ease that pain.
Yes.
NBC actually has a happy story at the end of all their newscasts.
Yeah.
And that's really what we would like. We would like more news organizations to choose to do that, to give us some good news at the end after you've given us all the bad news. Leave us with something uplifting. That's the best you can do for your audience. And Lavinia Weiser says, what's your view on independent media sources, alternative media? I've heard that most kids these days get their news from individual influencers they follow on YouTube and Instagram.
That is true.
Right. And that's what we hope to be. That's we're striving to be influencers that can define things differently, because now that we've got the internet, all of us have the ability to be that influencer, and we can decide to share good news. So let's do that. Well, we've got to go. And we want you all to make sure you follow us on Facebook and YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can get the notices every time we're live at 5 and 6 o'clock Eastern time on Sunday evening. And of course, make sure you tune in and share this with your friends. Until next time, I'm Naima.
I'm Cheryl.
I'm Barbara. We are 3 Black moms, and we give good news. Hi, I'm Barbara.
I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Naima. We're 3 Black moms.